All praise to the Most High YAHUAH, in the name of his only begotten Son, Yahshua. What is the firmament? So Genesis 1 and 6, the Most High God tells us that he created a firmament for the purpose of dividing water that's above the firmament from water that's beneath the firmament. Now Genesis 1 and 8 tells us the firmament is also called heaven, which tells us the firmament is in the sky, which means according to the Bible, above our heads is a solid barrier known as a firmament, a firm barrier. And on top of that barrier is water, meaning in the biblical understanding, the Bible never says there is space above the earth. It never talks about infinitely expanding universe or space. That's non-biblical. The Bible tells us water is above the sky. Let's understand. Psalm 19 and 1 tells us the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. So now what's so significant about understanding and believing in the firmament is that once you come to the knowledge of what the firmament truly is, the firmament actually proves God's existence. The firmament proves that God created us. So let's really understand this solid barrier that the Bible describes and understand how it does that. So Genesis 1 and 6, it reads, "And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." So you can see the firmament has to be a solid barrier because the Most High made it with the intention of dividing water. Everyone knows you need a solid barrier to divide water. That's why people make dams. A dam is a solid barrier to divide water. Okay? So it goes on to say, "And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so." So now we know there's waters above the firmament. That means there's water above the sky, and there's water underneath the firmament. There's water under the sky, which would be the sea and the ocean and the water that we encounter on the earth. Verse 8 says, "And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." So we can see in the second day of creation, if you believe in God's creation account, you need to have a biblical model in your mind with a firmament over it. So let me ask you a question. When you picture the earth in your mind, do you picture a firmament over it? Or do you just picture a globe with infinite space? Something that is not mentioned in the Bible. Now, people may say, oh, the waters above the firmament, they're no longer there. The waters disappeared, or they may come with some wacky understanding. But the Bible shows us clearly in the book of Psalm 148 and verse 4 says, "Praise him, ye heavens of heavens, and ye waters that be above the heavens." So even in the time of King David, when he lived, he said that there was water above the sky. So King David, who had all this knowledge of God, he believed in water above the sky. He didn't believe in space. All right? Praise the Most High. So let's understand how the Bible depicts the cosmology. How is the universe? How is known everything existence? How is it described? Is it described as, oh, we've got a spinning ball in outer space, and then we've got planets that orbit the sun, and then we've got a universe that everything is sitting inside of, and then outside of our universe is other universes? Does the Bible describe creation as being like that, or does it describe it differently? Well, Psalms 104 and 3 says, "Who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind." So this is talking about God in Psalm 104. And it says God's chambers, so where God lives in heaven, in his temple, yeah? It says that God's temple has foundation beams. And the foundation beams that support God's temple are in water. The pillars of God's temple are in water. And we know that God's temple doesn't sit on the waters of the earth. So that means it must be in the waters above the heavens, which makes sense because the Bible always says that God is in heaven. So clearly God's temple is above us, above the sky. And then what's so interesting about that is, yeah, God's in heaven, he's in the sky, but now it's saying that God sits on top of waters, that his temple has foundations on top of waters. So what water is God's temple founded on? God's temple is founded upon the waters that are above the firmament. Okay, so now you understand how this completely goes against the mainstream narrative of space and how we've been taught the earth is. Because according to the Bible, there's no space. You go up on the sky, you reach a solid barrier called the firmament, Above the firmament is waters, and in those waters are pillars that come up, and at the surface of the waters above the firmament is God's temple. And Genesis 1:6 says, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And obviously God's temple would be above the waters that are in the sky. So now let's know what the firmament looks like. Job 37:18 says, hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong and as a molten looking glass? So now the Bible saying the sky is strong. For something to be strong, it's got to be solid, right? So we know that it's talking about the sky has a solid part of it. And it's saying that the solid part of the sky is strong like a molten looking glass. Molten looking glass, in other translation, means like a cast iron mirror. So which part of the sky is solid? Because we know that the sky that we encounter every day, it isn't solid like a molten looking glass. So that shows us that the firmament is given, more detail to that characteristic of how strong the firmament is. So if you believe in the Bible, you should believe there's a solid barrier at the top of the sky. All right. And now we're going to understand what that barrier looks like. Exodus 24:10 says, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness. So it says under God's feet, when the elders and Moses saw the Most High God in a vision, it says underneath his feet, they could see that it was like a pavement of sapphire stone. And you see what sapphire stone looks like. And it was like the body of heaven, which means like the sky in its clearness. So they saw like a transparent sapphire stone underneath God's feet. And the Septuagint says, and they saw the place where the God of Israel stood, and under his feet was as it were a work of sapphire slabs, and as it were the appearance of the firmament of heaven in its purity. So now that's telling us that the firmament is always positioned in the Bible as underneath God's feet. So now we know that the firmament is above us and it has water on top of it. But in relation to God, the firmament's not above God, it's beneath him. So God lives on top of a firmament. And the firmament, according to this, is transparent, but you can see it. You can make out what it looks like. It's telling us the firmament has a blue look. It's blue like a sapphire stone, but then it's also transparent like the sky. So the firmament looks like the sky, man. Praise the Most High. It's this transparent barrier that is beneath God. Like Ecclesiasticus 43:1 says, the pride of a height of a clear firmament, the beauty of heaven with his glorious show. That's showing us, firmament is clear, it's transparent, and it's beautiful. Ezekiel 1:22 says, and the likeness of a firmament and the heads upon the heads of a living creature was as the color of a terrible crystal stretched forth over their heads above. So now we see Ezekiel is looking at the firmament, man, and he's saying that the firmament looked like a terrible crystal, okay? And when we look at that word for crystal, it's the Hebrew word for ice or frost. And it says in the book of Psalms 147:17, casteth forth his ice like morsel, who can stand before his cold? The word for ice is the same word for crystal. So now we know that the firmament is like ice, it's like crystal, it's like transparent crystal. And it makes sense because when you look and research this understanding of the biblical cosmology, the biblical layout and foundation of the world, the firmament is in Antarctica. Antarctica surrounds the earth. And if you went inland in Antarctica enough, you get to a part where you met this glass firmament and you wouldn't be able to escape. You'd be just like in the Simpsons movie here. You got to the edge of the world and now you find out you're living in a glass dome. All right. A sapphire clear crystal firmament with water on the other side of it, and God sat above it. That's the Bible. Do you believe it? With that, we say shalom. And the last one I'd say is, if you keep reading Ezekiel chapter 1, if you read down to 27, you see that it then says that God is above the firmament in verse 26. So we see consistently in the Bible, God is always positioned as being above this firmament. But we know water is above the firmament. So that gives us a clear understanding that God sits above the waters, above this solid barrier known as the firmament. And the reason why God is separated from us by the firmament and water is because that shows that God is in a holy heaven. God's heaven is set apart from our heaven because it has a barrier that separates him. It's like the Holy of Holies, right? Because the Bible in the book of Genesis shows us that the sky where the birds fly is known as heaven. So that's known as the first heaven. The firmament, as we see in Genesis 1 and 8, is also called heaven. So the firmament is considered the second heaven. And the heaven where God lives, above the waters, above the firmament, is called the third heaven. That's why 1 Corinthians chapter 12 says there's 3 heavens. Or I think it might be 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And God's heaven is known as the holy heaven. If you read the book of, I believe it's Psalm chapter 11 calls God's heaven the holy heaven, which means his heaven is the set apart heaven. And God's heaven is set apart from our heaven by the firmament. And yeah, it's Psalm chapter 20 that actually says it. It's Psalm 20 and it is verse, let me see where this verse is. Yeah, 6. Now know I that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Yah bless. Let us know your thoughts. Like and share this one, family. Yah bless.